Coming up, because it's Sunday and, hey, you asked for it, 5 more world-class ways to croak while recreationally welding at home. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au. New cars, cheap, Australia only, website, card. I've been industriously not croaking while welding, recreationally and otherwise, for 42 or something years now, and this is the sequel to my Academy Award-winning independent production from just a few weeks ago, the top 5 ways to weld yourself into an early grave in a fat cave, such as this, having fun, notionally, until it doesn't work out that way. I'll put a link to that particular report just up there if you're interested in reviewing it. In particular, the phosgene gas. You know phosgene, the chemical weapon that killed 85,000 troops in World War I? Yeah, well, if you get the chemical cocktail just wrong, just Goldilocks wrong while welding at home using some commonly available materials, you can manufacture it. Little pool of phosgene gas just this far from your face. The pro tip there: if you smell freshly cut grass, and there's no reason for that, such as no operating lawnmower and no lawn nearby, get out in a hurry, because that's what phosgene gas smells like, and there's no cure. So anyway, check that report out if you want, but without further ado, here are the next best 5 ways to croak while welding at home. This report is sponsored by NordVPN. Get 4 extra months of Nord free now at nordvpn.com/AEJC. Say you're in a cafe one day and you think you've just connected to the free Wi-Fi. But in fact, a hacker has just inserted himself between you and the internet, and he's about to start ripping you off properly. How would you even know? This is called a man-in-the-middle attack. It's one of the most common ways to get hacked. But there's no law that says you have to be the next victim. You need countermeasures, and that's what NordVPN does. NordVPN does the stuff that you and I don't understand in the background. Encrypting your data, hiding your IP address, locking everything down, basically. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now. The 2-year plan discount is huge right now. Plus, you're going to get 4 extra months free. nordvpn.com/AEJC. Link in the description. Just subscribe, download the app, and connect. 1 click later, your IP address is shielded, your online traffic is masked with NSA-level encryption across as many as 6 of your devices. NordVPN is the fastest VPN on the planet. It costs only about as much as 1 cup of coffee every month to keep your data, your identity, and your devices secure. Because your location is masked, you'll be able to access streaming and other services that might be blocked where you live. Plus, you can continue to watch your favourite content when you travel. You might even be able to score some great deals on travel and accommodation that are not available at home. That happens all the time. Go to nordvpn.com/AEJC now, boost your security, and enjoy that discount plus those extra 4 months of free subscription time. It's totally risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/AEJC, link in the description, and thanks to Nord for sponsoring this episode. Number 5, poison yourself with heavy metal. And in this case in particular, I'm talking about stainless steel and cadmium. Last time around, we talked about galvanizing, because that's a big worry. You know, zinc oxide can give you this terrible kind of allergic fever called metal fume fever. You don't want to suffer that. That can take you out of play for several days, and the long-term health effects are kind of unknown, but there's also a small amount of lead in galvanization, and the lead oxide from the welding fumes has been directly linked to lung cancer and brain cancer. So don't weld anything galvanized. Now, Stainless steel seems pretty innocuous. Kitchen sinks are made out of it, and you're probably turning the food for your barbecue and in the kitchen on stainless steel utensils, and they don't tend to hurt you very much either. However, when you weld stainless steel, and people try it inevitably, I mean, you can go down to Bunnings and buy yourself for $14 a small packet of 316L stainless steel welding electrodes and just plug it into your stick welder and have at it. The problem with that is hexavalent chromium, and that's probably ringing a few bells for you because Erin Brockovich, Julia Roberts, it was a real story. The real Erin Brockovich took a power company on because they were using hexavalent chromium in some anti-corrosive measure in a big industrial setting, and when they were done with it, they just emptied it into these ponds, and the ponds weren't lined, and the hexavalent chromium leached into the groundwater, and that caused people to get really sick, like cancer sick. And $333 million US dollars settlement for that one, if memory serves. When you weld stainless steel, you produce a small amount of hexavalent chromium, and it's really bad for you. Also, if you choose to use electrolysis to get the rust off steel, do not use stainless steel electrodes in the tank, right? Because it'll release some hexavalent chromium as well. In industry, if you're welding stainless steel, which happens all the time, they manage the airflow and they give you forced air respirators, and you've got laminar flow in the welding bay and extraction fans and things of that nature. In your shed, you've just got you and $100 welder and some hexavalent chromium. So that's a big mistake. And likewise, cadmium. Okay, cadmium is used to plate nuts and bolts and other hardware items. It's an anti-corrosive sort of coating, and it's quite decorative, like it's got a nice luster. But cadmium is properly bad for you as well. And don't just take my advice on this. According to the Occupational Health and Safety Authorities in America, on stainless steel, the health effects of hexavalent chromium from welding stainless steel. Fumes from stainless steel welding and grinding operations containing hexavalent chromium may cause irritation to the respiratory system, including runny nose, sneezing, coughing, and nosebleeds. And that doesn't sound too bad, right? If ingested at high levels, they say. Lung cancer may occur down the road as a result of long-term exposure. So don't expose yourself to that crap. On cadmium, overexposure may cause death. It's fairly unequivocal, isn't it? Short-term exposure to cadmium fumes can cause headaches, nausea, dizziness, and other respiratory issues. Long-term exposure can lead to kidney failure, emphysema, and lung cancer. In fact, the Occupational Safety Health Administration in America has defined cadmium as a carcinogen. So my strong advice would be, if you're welding at home, just limit yourself to welding low-carbon steel, like angle and box section and things of that nature. Build yourself a tidy little welding bench or a workbench out of 2x2, 50x50 tube or something of that nature. But when it comes to exotic materials and plated hardware, just avoid them like the plague. And if you need to get them welded, take them to a professional who's probably got the countermeasures for those hazards already implemented. The number 4 way to croak while welding at home is of specific interest to smokers. Because if you carry your lighter anywhere on you when you weld, that is just the most spectacular mistake. Smoking is bad for you. And there's no doubt. It increases the risk of all-cause mortality by something like 40%, if memory serves. But if you put that cigarette lighter in your top pocket in particular, but really anywhere on you when you're welding, you can become that statistical anomaly. The gas is butane, the pressure vessel is plastic, so if a big gob of molten slag or steel climbs down into your top pocket and starts making babies with your Bic lighter, the next thing that will happen is a fireball, and it can deflagrate with enough severity to blow important parts of you away. Literally. So that'll be an interesting orthopedic surgery challenge, if nothing else. And then if you're spectacularly lottery ticket lucky, the fireball will travel up inside your helmet. You'll have a sharp intake of breath, you'll suck the radiating plasma down into your lungs, and you'll wake up on morphine in the burns unit with a whole bunch of doctors tut-tutting and waiting until you expire, because there's usually no coming back from that. So don't weld with your lighter on you, and you have to be as frickin' disciplined as a Roman centurion about that. The number 3 way to croak recreationally while welding at home is to use your car as a de facto crematorium. So don't do that. And this is an automotive channel. A lot of people buy MIG welders in particular to do various repairs to panels and, you know, refurbishment of this and that on a project car. I get that. It's entirely allowed, but you have to manage the risk. A lead-acid battery produces hydrogen gas. Hydrogen gas is quite flammable. You don't want to be welding in an engine bay without protecting the battery from the sparks and the slag and all of that crap. So in industry, when you manage risk, one of the best ways to manage risk is to remove the hazard entirely, right? So you don't have to be up 40 stories on tiptoes like this with no harness welding something if the something can be taken down onto a welding bench. So it would be safer to weld it down here and then reinstall it up there, perhaps. That is a risk countermeasure. It's the best way to do it. But sometimes you have to go up there and do that. And this is the case with the car, because you can't remove all of the flammable crap from where you've got to weld all of the time. So what do? You sit down and you say, well, this is potentially hazardous, so I can't remove the hazard. I'm going to employ other countermeasures. So I would strongly advise you to get one of these, which is a fiberglass blanket. It's a welding blanket. In this case, it's 2 metres by 3 metres-ish, 6 foot by 10 foot in the old money. That's how they sell this one. This is from Vivor. They did give it to me. I'll put a link in the description. It's a great thing to have because fire-resistant, highly fire-resistant blanket. And basically, you just put it everywhere in the engine bay that you're not welding. So cover the battery, cover the fuel lines. If you're welding elsewhere to do a panel repair and there's flammable plastics and things of that nature, then just cover it up. But furthermore, when you're welding around a car, you have to say, well, there's a fuel tank down there. So if you're welding around the fuel tank, that's quite dangerous, right? Fuel lines, delivery lines and return lines, got to be mindful of them as well. And if you've got the earth lead hooked up to the car and the electrode in your hand, the whole car is live, right? Fuel tank, raining petrol all over you on a hoist, whatever, unthinkable. So you've got to weld around a car fully aware that you're in a hazardous environment and bad shit can happen. I see a lot of dudes build their own trays on YouTube, like they've got a 4x4 ute, they're building their own tray. That's fine. You should be able to do that and have fun in your driveway or in your garage, whatever, fabbing up your own tray. Like, fantastic. But you're working on top of the fuel tank. And the car might be, I don't know, 15 years old. And there's no guarantee that on a nice hot day, it's not off-gassing flammable vapors from the fuel tank. So you've got to employ countermeasures. You've got to contain the fuel tank. And you might want to do something to disperse those vapors. See, when I weld in here, even if I'm not doing anything quote-unquote dangerous, I get one of my biggest fans, like one of the old fans from home, and I just put it up here so that it blows whatever away. I've got cross-flow ventilation away, and I got the door open and things of that nature. If you are welding on a still hot day on top of a fuel tank in the driveway, this is just unthinkable. At least put a fan in place to handle the vapors and put something that will not burn and will contain slag and things of that nature on top of the fuel tank and wrap the fuel filler neck and all of that stuff. Otherwise, you're just asking to be on the news. The number 2 way to croak while recreationally welding at home would be not to think hard enough about the containers that you're welding on or repairing and what might previously have been in them. And in particular here, I'm talking about fun projects with decommissioned LPG bottles and also big fat drums of this and that, like 44-gallon drums, like 200-litre drums, and also fuel tank repairs are all in this container category of how you can croak entertainingly for the nightly news by welding at home. So let's deal with fuel tank repairs, which some people think are a good idea. They're going to have a crack. It's overly enthusiastic. You should not have a crack at repairing a fuel tank. You should just not do it. It's a job for a specialist. Every possible way of repairing a tank at home, a fuel tank, is fatally flawed, potentially, because it just takes a bee's endophallus of residual fuel in the tank, and it's unthinkable. You can fill the tank up with water, dude, and you can just orient it so that you're welding downhand on top of it and you think it's all good. Petrol's lighter than water, and so is diesel, right? So it's going to float to the top of the water, and therefore it's likely to be just underneath where you're welding. And if you get like a little bit of a hole blown in the tank, then that fuel on top is going to boil into the arc and explode into your face, and you don't want that. So the only way I can think of to safely repair a fuel tank welding is the way they weld in refineries in industry, which is to get some sort of inert gas, usually nitrogen or carbon dioxide or something, and just evacuate all the air in the tank by replacing it with one of these inert gases. And then you need to have self-contained breathing apparatus like scuba minus the U, and you need to have someone with you who monitors you because you don't want to just wake up dead because your breathing apparatus fails, blah, blah, blah. This is a job for a specialist, right? So do not repair a fuel tank. With LPG bottles, a lot of projects I note on YouTube involve turning a decommissioned, like use-by-date expired 9-kilo gas bottle into something like, I don't know, a forge. You can build a propane forge using a decommissioned LPG bottle. It's actually very good for that, but you have to decommission the cylinder the right way. It's not enough just to undo the cock from the top of the bottle and just leave it in the open air for a while, because LPG is heavier than air. So any LPG residually in the bottle is going to remain there, right? The only safe way, and this is not advice, but the only safe way to decommission an LPG cylinder is to fill it up with water, like fill it right up, and maybe do it a couple of times. Make sure you've got it absolutely right before you have a crack at it with a grinder or a welder. But you'd really want to think twice about doing anything like that, because it just is the benefit going to be enough to offset the risk? And in most cases, probably not. Just get yourself a dirty big piece of pipe and build your forge out of that, because that'll be a lot safer, at least in my view. And the other thing is using drums. Like, it's very tempting in a shed on a farm or something just to start welding on top of a drum, or use 2 drums and put a couple of pieces of steel between them, or a bit of plate or something like that. The problem with this is what was in the drum and how good is the integrity of the drum. And when you clamp that earth lead onto the plate, the drum becomes part of the circuit as well, and it can be a conduction path, and whatever's inside could just blow up. And 200 litres of flammable vapour is kind of unthinkable to be around when it goes up. So you just have to think about containers and decide that generally they're a bad idea, and let someone else be on the news, dude. And now, the #1 way to make a dead dude of yourself welding at home would be just fire risk generally. Now, I live in Sydney, Australia, Shitsville Central, and it is really dry, and we're just in spring, so it's shaping up to be a really dry summer. If you're welding outside, the risk of fire is extreme, and we do bushfires better than just about anyone else on the planet. California's pretty good from time to time, but I think we're better. That might just be patriotism talking. Whenever you weld, you can be a little bit oblivious to just how many sparks you are making, because you kind of focused in on the welding pool, at least you are if you want your weld to be any good. And the helmet attenuates all of that anyway. You can't really see the sparks, and if you're wearing the appropriate gear, you can't feel the heat or any of that. You might not have a real appreciation for just how many sparks you are throwing around. But I would say that if you're going to weld in Australia or anywhere else outdoors, you have to be extremely mindful of the conditions, and you have to have countermeasures in place. Like if something starts to burn, you've got to get on it really quick. You'd want a hose to be nearby, fire extinguisher, whatever. And you'd also want to deploy your handy little welding blanket to use up on, for example, a deck if you're repairing a handrail or a baluster or something of that nature. You'd want to use that as a shield so that the sparks can't just go anywhere. And the other thing I'd strongly recommend is, if you're doing any sort of welding of that nature, is organise a spotter. Like even one of your responsible kids, like you've got a kid who's, I don't know, 15 or something, just say, hey, don't look at this, but look around and sing out if anything goes wrong, because we've got to get on it. But generally, I'd say once again that it's a mistake to do anything of this nature in periods where there is a high fire danger. So you'd want to just maybe delay that little DIY project until the day after it rained overnight. That might make things a whole lot safer, but still have the hose and a fire extinguisher standing by, and still have a spotter so that they can get on it whenever anything goes wrong. Because if you let a bushfire get out of control around you, that's on you, dude. You're not just risking your own life, you're risking the lives of everybody who lives in proximity to you, and at the very least, it's going to change your relationship with your neighbours, and probably not for the better. Part two of this particular fire risk generally is that I see a lot of people and they're welding in an environment not unlike this, okay? And there are specific flammability hazards in a shed or a workshop that do not exist in industry. See, in industry, welding bays are generally self-contained things that don't have anything that burns inside them. Whereas welding at home, there's no OH&S Nazi who's cracking down on you about this and that. And I see people welding on their bench and they've got all this flammable shit. It's like bees endophallus. Away. They've got pressure-packed cans of spray paint or WD, whatever, and they might have an open container of petrol over there that they're using as a degreaser, like a solvent tank, which you should never do because petrol is terrible stuff to use for that. It's actually a very good degreaser and solvent, but it's just too freaking dangerous, so don't use it for that. But there's also things like acetone containers, little plastic bottles of acetone or denatured alcohol like metho, which are really good to use to clean up the parts just before you weld. Metho's pretty good because it evaporates and it's a good solvent for grease and other kinds of contaminants. Ditto acetone, they're both excellent products for that, and there's no residue. You're not going to hurt yourself with the vapours that come off materials that have been cleaned with products such as that, because they're non-residual. They evaporate completely, but the products themselves are so spectacularly dangerous, and they've got high rates of evaporation. They produce flammable vapours, and you shouldn't weld here with a bottle of acetone just here. And yet I see people do this all the time. The reason I want to get into this stuff, right, is because I think you should become that madman of metal manipulating mayhem of which you've always dreamed. And it's dead easy to go online or go down to Bunnings, whatever, and come back with a welder and a decent face shield like this and some gloves and have at it. But there's no guarantee that you're not going to hurt yourself unless you're aware of the risks and you take a great deal of personal responsibility so that you just say, I'm not going to let any of this stuff happen. It's so important. It's not just welding. It's using an angle grinder or anything else, right? You can hurt yourself with all of these mad Jedi pieces of metal manipulating mayhem equipment, but you don't have to. There are countermeasures. You can employ them. You can do this safely, and you can impress the shit out of yourself with the stuff that you can make. That's all fantastic. But hearing a bang and then waking up in an ambulance is just unthinkable, as is spending the next 6 weeks based out of your head on oxycodone and wondering when it's all gonna be over. I don't want you to go there. I so don't want you to go there. But I do want you to have fun doing this, because I've always really enjoyed it and still got all my fingers. And if I can do it, dude, so can you.